Okay, I think, yeah, we're live. Okay, welcome everyone. We're just gonna kind of hang out and do a Q&A. Recently, we put out the Raventree Society audiobook, and T. Bill James is my narrator. So we're just gonna hang out and talk about that. I am J.E. Prazzi, a speculative fiction author and the writer of the Raventree Society and the Malfunction trilogy. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. I'm going to allow T. Bill James to introduce himself, and then we will kind of just throw some questions back and forth. But if you have any, please leave them in the comments, and we will answer them.
Great. Well, so my name is T. Bill James. I am the narrator of Raventree Society. I feel very, very fortunate and lucky to have been chosen and to be a part of this book. I have always felt that narration was something I wanted to do, but it was important to make sure that I got off started with it the right way, with the right kind of book. And I was always curious about what a relationship would be with an author, for instance. How would that work? And I was very anxious to get started in something like this. So I feel very fortunate to be a part of this book and to be working with you. Um,
Thank
so
you.
it's awesome. It's really awesome.
Yes, it has been a great experience. This is my second time producing an audiobook. And I feel like this experience has gone much better than the last, although, I really enjoyed the last as well, but this has just been great. So I'm very thankful for how great it's been to work with you. So I'll go ahead and ask the first question, and you kind of answered the first two I had down. So I'll
Okay.
go ahead and skip to the third and ask what you enjoyed most about narrating the Raventree Society.
Oh, good question. It's kind of a tough one to answer because I enjoyed a lot of things about it. One, I enjoyed the challenge of narrating a book. This is my first book that I narrated, but I felt very confident going into it. So I wasn't scared about the size of the book or about hearing my own voice for hours on end. But what I did discover though that was challenging was the narration aspect. So um, doing the characters when I was had a moment to act out as Kyle or as Tyler. I'm sorry, not Tyler, but as Josh. I loved being their voices and I loved giving them a personality. Doing the narration was hard. So trying to just explain what happens next. They walk into this room where suddenly there's a spider on his arm, and that was much harder. And I was surprised. I thought that doing the characters was going to be harder. Turns out doing the characters was way more fun because I could really act out and really get into the voice and his expressions or her expressions.
Yeah, and you did a great job with those. Like, I really enjoy your characters' voices. Those are really great and really immersive, and I know that listeners will enjoy those as well. And the narration was great as well. Um,
Nothing.
if you get a chance, if you guys are listening to the audiobook, you'll notice I just loved when the creepy parts came. How well um, T. Bill James was able to just bring that creep factor across, and that was actually why I chose him in the first place. I was like going through and like looking through a whole bunch of people, and I was like, that's the one. So I was very very excited when
Nice to be
you
the one.
picked me. I was like, yay! Okay, so why don't you go ahead and pitch me a question if you have
Okay.
any?
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you about writing. So how did the idea of Raventree Society first come to you? And then at what point did you say, hey, this can be sort of like a serialized TV show in a format of a novel?
Good question. If you ever ask an author about their inspiration, you're going to have a very long answer because we kind of pick them up from everywhere. Um, I originally wasn't that big into horror. I thought of horror as being like that, like the gory body horror, which I hate, or like cheesy horror movies. And so I wasn't big on horror. And then when the idea came to me, I was like, oh yeah, like all of my favorite books are gothic horror. So apparently I do like horror. Um,
Mhm.
so the idea originally came to me. My mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had just informed me, and it it was kind of late in the year. So my husband was really into Halloween, but we never celebrated when I was younger. But of course, there was like all the horror kind of stuff in the air. And I guess I was just kind of thinking about family and about death and about ghosts and kind of all that kind of stuff mixed together. And the idea for the first short story came to me, and I just started writing. Lots of times, when I'm working on something heavy, and my other brand is science fiction, so it's very research heavy. A lot of times when I'm doing something heavy, I kind of need these side projects to just like veer off and be adventurous for a little while before I come back. And that was all Raventree was for a while, until I started getting into it and I started writing it. And the first episode, as much as I love it, is just packed full of cliches. But once the character voice came to me, I just fell in love, and everything just unfolded out in front of me. And the more I wrote it, it was just like this, like asking questions about death, about what happens to a family when they're interacting with death, what happens to an individual, and how to cope with grief and how to cope with the inevitability of death, and just all those like deep, beautiful Gothic themes. And so I just modernized it. It was easy writing because I didn't have to do as much in-depth research as I had to with my science fiction at the time. So I was able to just bust them out during NaNoWriMo and really just have fun with them. But the story was just kind of there. When I wrote it, it was just natural. I didn't really have to plan. I just knew what was going to happen next. And I just knew the character voices. They just came to me. So it was easy. It was fun. It was a great project.
Nice. Excellent. I kind of have a follow-up question to that, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Family. So, I know that we've all dealt with death in our families in one form or another, whether it's grandparents or parents. And there's a lot of that in the book. Family has a lot. The book is very heavy in family.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, it's a complicated relationship that Kyle has with his stepbrother Josh and his stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
And they make distinctions between their biological parents versus, their step parents, and lines are blurred, I guess. Relationships are blurred in a good way. Kyle's growing into thinking of his stepfather as his father now, and I was just curious how much of your real life is represented in that, or is it none at all, outside of just feelings that you may have had about characters?
So it's kind of a complicated question, because in a lot of ways, things happened after I wrote about them. So my dad actually just got remarried, and there is a lot of complicated relationships in that, coming into, having a new stepmother and 3 new stepbrothers and stepsisters-in-law. Like, we have a huge family as it is. I'm one of 6 kids. And all of a sudden there's like 3 new families involved in this. And different people in our family are handling that in different ways of like, I don't want to talk to them or get to know them because it's too soon, or, I'm going to make an effort. I'm really happy for my dad, but I'm not interested in a relationship at this time. It's been 2 years since my mom passed. So all of this was written. I believe the 3rd season was halfway written when my mom passed, or close. It might have been completely written. So all of that was already written. I didn't know that this was going to happen. When I tend to explore subjects, I just ask questions about it. And when I was asking questions, that kind of came. What I was exploring a little bit more, and as a Christian, this is where you won't see very strong Christian themes in my books. But as a Christian, I was recently diagnosed with depression, but I guess it's been, it's probably been there my entire life. I had a very hard time relating to God and relating to the church, and constantly feeling like I was a disappointment or a black sheep, or that for some reason God's grace, I hadn't earned it. And it was that God regretted allowing me to feel his grace as well. So in a lot of ways, Kyle's relationship with Josh and with his stepfather Carl is my view of my relationship with God and with the church, just in a much more humanized way. So in a lot of ways, that was me working through that, and through this kind of concept that change doesn't come before love. You don't have to earn love by changing, but change is oftentimes an outpouring of love. So you are loved and you are accepted, and then you change, which is deeply Christian, but also applies to anyone. You know, you don't need to put yourself at risk to love someone, and you don't need to love someone in order to change them. But when someone is loved, then change comes easier. So I think those relationships were much more inspired by that. And of course, I didn't understand that till I was nearly done with the entire series, but that's where it came from.
Well, they're great relationships, and I really like how they're handled and how they're dealt with. It's great.
Thank you. Yes, I loved writing those. So my next question for you, what was your favorite episode of season 1? And we might get into some spoilers here. So
Okay.
if you absolutely don't want spoilers, maybe listen to the audiobook first and then come back. But we'll try and veer clear for the most part.
So that's a really good question. I think I have favorite moments of every episode, but purely as a narrator, I think I enjoyed the Cleo a lot. 3 and 4, I really enjoyed books or episodes 3 and 4. And what I liked about them was the historical element it brought in. So, in the 4th episode, it's dealing with a restaurant/bar that has been around for a while, and it's been managed by a family, and it goes back for generations. And there is a pretty, I don't know if there is a long history of some activity in the basement, and actually in one of the conference rooms at the restaurant or /bar. And also the Cleo, which is episode 3, that is a mansion. And am I getting them? I don't think I'm getting them.
I think the Cleo is the bar, and the Cole Mansion is the mansion.
Oh, the
yes,
Cole Mansion.
I get confused with them too. That's the one problem of having so many episodes.
The Cole Mansion is 3, and that's the Cole Mansion. Similar in that it's got a history. It's interesting though, because it's got a history dating back to the 19th century that works its way up. And in the book, they actually go over it, and I really thought that was so cool because it added an element of mystery to the story, and it was just that much easier for me to just sink my teeth into that, story and get into the characters more and really dig into the eeriness of it all, because horror is great. Horror is great, especially when it's done well, when it's not just about gore and it's not just about scaring people, but it's about a backstory, and it's about something that happened to someone, and maybe even to the point of trying to solve a mystery and uncover what actually went on. And that's what I love so much about those stories. So there is, it's not just horror, right? I mean, there is a mystery element to it. So there's the thriller mystery part of it that was really, really fun to read, because as I'm narrating it, I mean, I read ahead before I started narrating it, but then when I'm actually narrating the book, I'm able to dig in further and get into the characters, right? And now I'm actually living it. I'm actually experiencing it as if I'm actually the people in the book. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of great moments that I really enjoyed doing.
Yeah. And coincidentally, that's most readers identify those two as their favorites. Typically, the Cole Mansion is a favorite. But the Clear was based off of a real life location that I've seen in multiple ghost hunter shows. In fact, I might go ahead and pop that in the comments when we're done, so you guys can look it up yourself. But it's a real bar that apparently has this hole in the basement that's supposed to be a opening to hell, and plates go flying off the out of the cupboards and stuff at night. And so it was fun to kind of play off of that and kind of use a real world location in a unique way.
Have you ever visited or taken any haunted tours?
I haven't, except for one, and it wasn't actually a haunted tour, but so I've been to places that are supposedly haunted. The Near us in Florida, there's a place called St. Augustine that has this huge fort that just has like some really deep and heavy backstories, some history to it. So exploring that was a lot of fun, and seeing like drawings people had left in the walls. And I've always been big into history. But then specifically for season 2, there's an episode that takes place at a house at a park near here that from the Victorian era, and they do a haunted tour in October typically. I didn't actually take that tour, but I did ask questions about the hauntings, and I got all the information, so I was able to go in and use that exact location in episode 2, or not episode 2, season 2.
So you're actually taking real locations and using some of the facts about those locations as material for the stories. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you get to episode 4 of season, episode 4 of season 2, that takes place in an actual location that you can go visit and take a haunted tour. And they have found a dead body in the lake, and they have seen 2 people. Like, so if you read those parts, that specifically comes from actual history of like hauntings in the area. So that was a lot of fun to play with. I probably won't do that regularly in future horror writing because it was complex. I just felt really bad. I'm like, I'm defaming someone. These people actually existed, and I don't want them to be horrible ghosts. But it was fun.
Right. I do have a haunted ghost story, if you don't mind me sharing real quick. And
you share.
So, my father was a history teacher, so we had summers off. So we did a lot of traveling when I was younger. When I was 7 years old, we went to Vermont. And Vermont is a heavily haunted state. So we went to this one house where the story goes that there was a young boy who died there. And it turns out that he was also 7 when he died. So this was back in the late 70s. My father used to take a lot of photos. But back then, we would watch the photos. He would get them developed as frames. So I don't know how many people know what frames are, but they're the cardboard squares, and they have the celluloid in the center. And he would put them in a projector. And then, once we get the film back, like a week after we got back from our trip, we would go ahead and watch the slides from our trip as a family. So we're watching the slides, and he took a picture of me in front of that haunted house. Now, I can't remember the year the boy died, but on the side of every frame in the cardboard in red letters is a number to the frame. Like it might be a 4-digit number, like 1736 or something along those lines. Well, on the photo that my father took of me in front of the house, for some reason, the printing of the number for the slide was printed in the wrong spot. It was accidentally printed right onto the celluloid. So when we got to that frame, the number was above my head in the picture. And the number was the year the boy died. And that's true. That's really creepy.
Did you look carefully at all of the windows and at all of the shadows to see if there's faces looking back at you? Or do you not want to do that?
I would have to, my mother still has all those slides somewhere. So I need to ask her if she can find them. It'd be tough to find them from that particular trip, but we'll do our best, and maybe I'll take a good hard look and see what I find.
Maybe you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Oh, that's cool. Wow. It's a little creepy.
I had another question about plots, which you kind of answered. I was going to ask you about, how did you come up with the plots for the stories? You kind of answered that a little bit when you said that you use some of the material from actual places that you've discovered, some nearby and some that you've heard about. But I'll ask it this way then. What is your favorite plot or your favorite type of plot in the horror genre that you've used, and why?
I am very heavily into gothic horror. So my favorite plots are the ones, how do I put this? So I feel like comedy and horror are two of the most effective ways to get themes through and get like a message through, because you don't think about those things. You're either scared or you're not. You either laugh or you don't. If you have to stop and think about it, then it's not so scary anymore. Then you're like logically, so it's a very rare time when you think about something for a little while and then you're like, oh yeah, that kind of was scary. I feel like one of the reasons why I love gothic horror in the same way that I lean heavily into cyberpunk is because I love the themes that come back to personhood and humanity, that explore people. And this is also why I really like that kind of early gothic horror. I'm really into the classics. So particularly ones that dig into, and the gothic horror I'm writing right now really digs into human beings as being the monsters. So not necessarily in a way in which it's like a serial killer or something, but more in a supernatural side where you realize that you are the evil, that the evil is inside of you and you have to deal with that, or that the evil is around you and you have to deal with that. So I really love that aspect. I think especially in Raventree, dealing with the ghosts is, working through grief and sorrow and death, and working through the mental toll in the relationships. And I love that in gothic horror as well. So yeah, and then when it came to plotting, like if you want to talk about like the plotting of the individual episodes, I actually came up with a pattern for each episode. So because I'm heavily into plotting. I don't when we talk about writing, there's the plotting and the pantser, and the people who just write and see where it takes them, and there's the people who plan ahead. So I had kind of a rhythm to each episode, and then my goal was to deviate from that, because I feel if you understand what's going on, then it's not so scary anymore. So I had kind of a rhythm that each episode followed, and then every once in a while I would pull something away from that or add something to that to deviate from that. And then I also wanted each episode to, of course, carry on the plot. So I always had like I need to work in this piece of information, or this specific character trait, or this specific relationship, so that when we get to the end, it all makes sense. It's established. It's not like, wait, ghosts can do that? Like, when did that happen? So yeah, so that was kind of my thought process when it came to plotting.
Nice. I'll tell you the system that you've worked out, the model that you use and that you eventually deviate from, I really enjoy too. As a narrator, I really enjoy knowing that for the most part, there's going to be a flashback or a vision that Kyle's going to have. I don't know what's going to happen after that vision, and that's, I think, typically where the variations tend to happen is, how does that vision relate to what happens next to Kyle? And it obviously it first happens in the first story, and it's very clear where it happens, but then it starts to get a little blurred in the other stories, how those visions affect what happens to Kyle next. And in the last story of the first book, the fifth story, it really, I love how it gets summed up. I mean, almost summed up, knowing that yes, there's going to be another book after this, but summed up for that book. And I just love how it brings everything together, even the relationship aspect, the personal aspect of Carl and Josh and Kyle's relationship as family now. And it's really cool. So I think it works brilliantly, your model.
Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. So one more question for you.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
So I'm working on, very, very slowly, because life is insane. I'm working on a gothic horror. It's kind of in the Southern Gothic vein, but it does take place in New York, because New York is very, very deep in the Gothic horror books. You know, you have Gothic horror is one of these genres that likes to refer back to itself. So when you're
Mhm.
reading a Gothic horror, especially a classic, you're going to see it referring to other Gothic horrors. You're going to see it like in a similar setting, or you're going to have, for instance, if you've ever watched Netflix's Haunting of Hill House, which was part of the inspiration for Raventree Society. Or, you know, you can dig forever and be like, oh, this refers to this, and this refers to this book, and this refers to this specific line in this book, but this refers to a completely different book. And there's people who've done like really in-depth stuff on this. So this is typical for Gothic. And my lovely rabbit trails. I'm great at rabbit trails, by the way. But so this takes place in New York because of the history behind it. And it's, the idea is kind of a small town. Young woman moves there after she's released from jail, and she just got custody back of her teenage son, and she moves to the small town to just get away from everything. And she's starting to kind of settle in a little bit, but they're in this tiny little cabin on an older woman's property out like at the edge of the woods. And they start seeing things coming out of the woods and just kind of walking around their cabin at night. And so the idea is that there's a hellmouth in these woods, which is a very Puritan idea that, you know, deep, creepy woods had hellmouths in them. And these things are coming out of the woods, and they take the form of certain people. And at first, those people's desires control these things, and so these things are acting out your worst inclinations and going around murdering people and stuff like that. And then eventually, those things start controlling you, and then they consume you. So, so they're kind of trapped in this tiny little town that's under attack by all these doppelganger monsters, and it's a lot of fun. But also very, very hard to work into, because one of the themes is people's sin natures, which is very hard to work on because you don't want to just sit there and dwell on how horrible people are. But hopefully it has a slight positive turn in it as well. I don't want it to be depressing. I don't like depressing stuff. It's not my goal with writing, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So. Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of, when you talk about depressing, there's a lot of creativity that comes out of darkness, if you know what I mean. I tend to find, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think most people would agree that sometimes at their darkest moments, they're the most creative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, talk about love songs, you talk about sad songs, you know, I mean, but people love those kinds of songs. You know, those kinds of songs, just like, they hit people on such a guttural level, and they speak to people at that level. And I think the same goes with horror. I think that's why horror, something like horror, is so popular. And I mean, you know, I'm listening to a book now. One of my favorite authors is Robert Mccammon. And Robert Mccammon has a book called They Thirst. Now, They Thirst sounds really brutal as a title already. It's a vampire story. But the whole part of the setup of the story is that it goes all the way back to Hungary, to folklore in Hungary, way, way back, hundreds of years. And so there's this folklore that has existed for probably a millennia. And it's still here, you know, and so me as a listener, I'm attracted to that kind of stuff. And so I do think that there's this long artery of what am I trying to say? This long artery of creativity and darkness that has been tapped into long before modern Western culture has existed. It's just something that is innate in humans, that we bring this stuff out, and we're attracted to it, reading it, watching movies about it, looking at TV shows about it. Anyway, it's my 2 cents on the topic.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. We want to explore the darkness, even if we're scared of it, and it makes it a little bit safer to do it in a book. And I'm definitely inspired. I reread the portrait, the picture of Dorian Gray, as well as I'm rereading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Reread both of them actually, because I mean they've already done it and they've done it so much better. But this kind of exploration of the darkness that's inside of us is very, it's very interesting. I think it's a concept that maybe the modern reader isn't as interested in as they were, you know, back in the Victorian times. We're more interested now in the darkness that we can't see, because we're kind of sick of staring at our own darkness. But I think it's still worth exploring.
For sure. Who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh my goodness. So I'm kind of all over the place. I definitely love the classics. I grew up on the classics and I still love them most. My cat just jumped up on. So if there's shuddering and shaking, it's her. So right now I really am enjoying The Expanse, James S.A. Corey. Really great stuff. And then in the Gothic horror, like I tend to like books more than I like particular authors. But I've found a few consistent authors that I've really enjoyed in the Gothic.
McDowell, I think his name is McDowell. He writes a lot of Blackwater.
I haven't read a lot of modern ones.
Okay.
I mostly read classics. So I really enjoyed, and I'm actually reading a collection now of what's his name? Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Irving. Really enjoyed that. And then trying to think of another author. See, this is why, like, I enjoy books in particular and follow authors a little bit less. And most of the modern authors that I follow are indies because I know them and I know how great their stuff is. But yeah, so there's a few modern authors that I really enjoy and that I've followed. But it's been a more recent thing, like in the past, like 10 years that I've like forced myself to like, okay, we don't need to read Brothers Karamazov and Washington Irving constantly. We can try something a little bit more modern. So I've been exploring a little bit.
Nice. Well, very cool. Very cool.
Yes. But I'm very open to suggestions too.
Yes. Well, I love Robert Mccammon. He's an outstanding author. He came up in the 70s, late 70s, very similar, corresponding with Stephen King's career. They kind of were parallel to each other. Similar writing. Although Robert Mccammon he's gotten more into coming of age material as well, not just horror. In 1991, he wrote a book that is probably my favorite book of all time, called Boy's Life, which is an absolutely beautiful book. It's one of those books where not one word is out of place. I think he knew it when he was writing it. But he has a series now called the Matthew Corbett series, which is brand new.
Yeah.
He started writing it in 2002, I think, and he's still writing the book series. And it's sort of like a little bit of Hercule Poirot and a little bit of Sherlock Holmes all put together in 1699 in America. But it's a little bit, it's more gory. It's a little bit darker. But it's fascinating. It's so cool. And Eduardo Ballerini, one of my favorite narrators, narrates it, and he's amazing at narrating period piece, because he sounds like he was born in. He doesn't sound like he was born in 1699, but he sounds like he was born in 1820. So it's close enough for me.
I will check those out. Those sound really good. I've been on kind of a Victorian detective novel kick as of late. So I've been wanting to read more of those. So I should check those out.
That's cool.
I did want to put in, I see we have a viewer now. I'm not sure who you are because you haven't said hi yet, but hello to you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and we will be happy to answer.
Yes, definitely.
So, thank you for hanging out with us.
So I am in the middle of the second book now, narrating the second book and recording it, and it is fascinating. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I'm dying to talk to you about it.
Yes. Well, we'll just give a spoiler warning for season 1 and go for it.
Well, I will say that this is a spoiler alert, sort of. I'm not going to give any information away about plot or storyline, but it's one of the characters,
Mm,
Sadie. And
yes.
I love Sadie. And you were earlier were asking me about, what do I enjoy about narrating? And I mentioned the challenges and what I and how much I enjoy doing characters and the challenges of narrating the narration aspect of the story. Sadie, because she's a medium, I wanted to make sure I was like, well, how do I approach a medium? I don't want her to just be another female voice. I wanted
Yeah.
to have something unique to her voice. And I figured that making her eccentric would be a great
Hmm.
idea, right?
Yes.
Because that's how most people regard mediums in the first place. Well, they must be eccentric because, they're talking to spirits and the netherworld all the time and they're thinking about those things all the time. So I loved coming to her voice and saying, "Aha, this is how I'm going to do it." And I actually went to my wife and said, "What do you think about this voice? What do you think about this voice for this character?" And she helped me work out. It's a little too choppy, maybe not so choppy. Try this instead. And so it was a lot of fun to do. I don't want to give anything away, but I
I'm
definitely
so
made her voice a
excited.
little unique. It was really cool. It was really cool.
I had fun writing her, and I can't wait to hear your version of her. And that episode. Just to put a little bit of extra pressure on you, is the top favorite for season 2. So
It's scary as can be. I tell you that. I was alone in the house recording the vision, the flashback slash vision part of that. And there were a couple of times I had to take my headphones off and just go downstairs and like make sure everything was like copacetic down there before I came back up and went back into the studio.
no spiders crawling out. Yeah, when I came up with that idea, I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were talking about bugs, and I was like, "Oh, I know how this is going to go," and she was like, "I don't want to read that one." I appreciate that.
Yeah,
She
it
thought it
was
was scary enough. That put me on the right direction.
that's scary. Boy, that's really scary.
Yeah.
I remember telling my wife and my daughter, I was saying, check this out. This is what happens. And like, as I started to talk about it, my daughter was like, stop. I don't want to hear anymore.
Yes. Well, that episode was a lot of fun. Particularly because it was exploring the psychology of Kyle so much more. And I don't know
Mhm.
how much of it you've read. Um,
All of it. Yeah.
but yeah, so it's definitely digging into the kind of depression and the way that it entangles, and it was very interesting exploring those and kind of digging into my own experiences and my experiences with some of my friends, and kind of this mentality of like, it's not like he wants to go out and kill himself, but he's having a hard time, and this is what it looks like and this is what it feels like to some degree. So I do wonder if that's why so many people connect to it, because it's such a common experience, whether you have something diagnosed or whether you're just going through a hard time. We all experience those kind of dark patches. So it was really good to like get deep into Kyle and explore,
Hmm.
and
Even
some
the
of
state
like,
of his apartment.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just a messy
and
apartment, and he doesn't have the energy to just like, he doesn't want to deal with even just keeping it clean or making sure he has enough forks and knives in the house or,
yeah.
yeah.
So, and because I love characters and I love character voices, it was just so much fun to explore his history and talk about like his relationship with Josh, and then all the fun reveals. I think, like I said, there's a reason why that one's the favorite, the common favorite in that season. Um, and yeah, so I'm excited to hear your
Cool.
version of
I'm
it.
excited too.
Yes,
All right. So Shy
yes.
is in. Hi,
She
Shy.
popped in, and I guess she's gone again. Shyla
Oh,
is
okay.
actually my critique partner, so no spoilers for her because she helped me write the entire thing.
Oh, okay.
Yes, she got the episodes before everyone else did. So, her and her husband went and told me whether or not it kept them up at night. So, whether or not it was scary. Oh, she's there. Hi.
Yeah, nice.
Yes. So,
So I want to ask you about the covers of your books. So
yeah.
I was so I had been approached several times to narrate through ACX, which is the Audiobook Creation Exchange, and that's how Jelaine and I met for the first time. But um, one of the things that I was excited about, and one of the things I wanted to take on the project was one, because it was quality work. It's like I'd been approached by others, and I was like, it's not really a genre I want to do. I don't feel comfortable with this story, or I just don't connect with that kind of book. But then with yours, I was like, this sounds perfect for me, and I was really excited. But then when I saw the photos or not the photos, but the covers of the books, I was like, whoa, these are awesome. Um, the one of the graveyard is the second book. The one of the bike in the woods is the first book, and then the one of the house is the third book. And I was just shocked. I was like, man, these are great. And I showed them to a friend of mine, and they said, I would buy this book just based on the cover alone. And I was like, I know, right? They're so cool. And then I asked you, who's your artist? And you told me that you were.
I did those. Yep.
And I was blown away even more. So tell us about all of your talents, because obviously writing is not the only thing that you do.
Yeah, well, I dabble in art. I was much more into it when I was younger, so I'm definitely rusty. This is actually one of my pieces up here. This is Kyle. Oop, wrong direction. There we go. And I have Hanover on this wall. And a little bit. I'm just gonna leave it down. A little bit rougher with people than I am, but it was a fun project. But yeah, so I do some art. I enjoy watercolor and acrylic, and I've done a few covers for some other friends as well. But mine are definitely my favorites because I know I'm confident in what I can do well, and watercolor actually works really well with horror. So I was able to do the covers for those, and then of course writing. I could dig a little bit for more hobbies and talents, but yeah, honestly, I work full time as a childcare provider, so there's not a lot that I don't get to sink much time into my art either. But yeah, so those
That's
are some
great,
of the things
though.
I do. Yeah, but
Writing
if you
and
enjoy
art.
the covers,
I love.
and you want the art, I do have prints and merchandise available on this right here on my merch shop. So just
Yeah,
a little plug there.
people should go to Amazon, to your website, and take a look at the books, look at the covers. The covers are fantastic, and they make you want to read the books. They make you want to know what's happening.
Thank you. Yeah, I have them actually right here. There we go. Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
number one, and each one it's mostly a landscape, but I do have like a little reference to one of the creepy stories. So that's a reference to episode 2. The graveyard is episode to episode 1 because it's got the candle there of season 2. And then actually, if you look very close, there is a noose, which is a reference to the main big bad and the end of season 3. So if you look, there's little nuggets hidden in there.
And that news runs through the entire book. That's a theme that just constantly comes back. That seems to haunt Kyle. Yeah, but it's really, really cool. So people should check out this book on Audible. They need to go check it out. Take a listen to the little 4.5-minute blurb as a sample to get a kind of a feel as to what some of the backstory is and some of the characters involved. But the book is fantastic. The book unfolds so perfectly, and it's got such that really good dark horror, that gothic horror that you just love to sit and listen to and dig into. Let your mind wander inside of that story and get used to it. So I really urge everyone to go and check it out, take a listen to the book, download it, enjoy it, write us a review, let us know what you thought about the book, how much you loved it. But give us an honest review, though. Let us know. And let us know, because we're coming out with 2 more books, right?
Yes.
Parts 2, parts 3.
So we're season 2 and season 3, and they're coming soon. So I'm very excited for those. I'm very T. Bell James just did an amazing job, like everything I could have dreamed of. I remember when I first kind of pitched it to him, I was telling actually my critique partner who's on right now, I was like, Shyla, this is my favorite and this is my like dream. And I don't know, I don't think, but I'm going to like throw it out in the dark and hope. And so I got my dream narrator and I'm very, very
Oh,
excited
thank
about
you.
that.
Well, thank you. I want to give a shout out to Peter Burcroft. If anyone doesn't know Peter, he's a narrator. He's got about 500 books under his belt. He's been my coach, and he's fantastic. He was actually in Caddyshack, the movie.
Mm.
He's in the famous Bill Murray scene where Bill Murray says, "I got that going for me." He's the young time he was younger, and he's the teen there. But he's been an unbelievable coach, and he's helped me along the way. Helped me express this more. Hold back here. Just really taught me a lot in a very short period of time about how narrating works and about voice acting. So I wanted to give a shout out to him because he deserves it.
Yeah, it really shows. It really shows. You've done an amazing job.
Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely, like, I'm going to urge everyone, go check out the audiobook. But if you want to just try it, just to make sure that this is your jam, you can find the first episode free on every platform except for Amazon. So you can go read the first one, see if you enjoy it. You will enjoy it much more in audio. I'm going to tell you that right now because I enjoy it much more in audio. But if you want to just test and you're not sure you want to jump in, because I know not everyone is like, hey, let me try a new horror. There's that available. So yeah, definitely check out the audiobook.
Awesome. Well, Jelaine, I want to thank you so much for suggesting that we do this. It was her idea, and I'm thrilled that she had this idea. We've spoken before I actually even started the first book we had spoken, but we've stayed in touch the whole time. I send her samples. Every once in a while, I'll send her like a 2 or 3 minute sample and say, hey, do you like this? What do you think about this voice, etc. So you've been a really great person to work with. I want to tell you that sometimes people in author / narrator relationships, sometimes they treat it like a legal thing. Like, I understand contractual language and I understand have things in writing, but beyond that, they don't talk to each other. And I'm like, well, that's not me. I mean, we're collaborating on this, right? I want to know that I'm meeting your standards along the way, and maybe you have I want you to have some input if you feel like you want to. And I just don't understand how some people think it's like, oh, well, it's like buying a home. You don't talk to the people who you're buying the home from. You just deal with the middle person, the realtor agent. I don't like that. So I love the fact that we've had this back and forth the whole time, and it's made the project that much more fun for me.
Yeah, and it's my perspective going into this was like, hey, I wanted to make this a good experience for you because you're definitely putting in the more work here. Like, I've already done the work behind what I need to do. It's out, it's published. So you're putting in the greater effort and the greater risk. So my top priority was make it a great experience for you, but also my viewpoint when it comes to an audiobook is that, when you're looking at a different medium, this isn't just like my book. This is my book interpreted through a narrator who brings his own creativity, his own perspective of the characters and his own acting skills. So you're adding a whole bunch of your own creativity and your own depth to this, which makes it its own experience. And I think I've said this to you before, and I've said it probably to multiple people. This is the closest I'm ever going to get to like being a reader of my own book. When they say write the story you want to read, or congratulations, you'll never want to read it because you've written it and you'll cringe through the entire thing. So this is the closest I'm going to get to like sitting down and enjoying my book and seeing my reader's perspective and my reader's perception of what I've written. And I've loved it. So thank you so much for a great experience and for working with me so much for, just doing this kind of stuff. But yeah, we're coming to a close here. Is there anything you wanted to kind of pitch for yourself, T. Bill James? Any websites, anything like that?
Well, sure. I do have a podcast with a colleague of mine, Annette Linville. And Annette and I have put together a podcast called The Composer Studio. So you can see behind me, I have a drum studio. So I record drum parts for songs for clients. And so I come as a narrator with all the gear already that I need, my microphones, my digital audio interface to record into, and all that. So I went to the Manhattan School of Music as a composer. So I have a lot of background in education as a classical composer. And thank you so much, Shai. And so, you know, what could I lend to a podcast about this? And I was like, well, you know, Anna and I had this idea. Well, let's put together a podcast where we interview living composers. We introduce them, we talk to them, and then we would even ask them about particular pieces that we would first talk about and then have played on the show. So we usually have about 3 or 4 classical pieces from that composer on that show, and every episode is about an hour to an hour and a half long, and it's on the Composer Studio. Composerstudio.net is the website, and you can listen to them all. They're all free to listen to, and it's a great show. And it was actually several people who, as a result of this podcast, said, you know, I know how much you love audiobooks, and I do. I listen to close to 50 a year. Someone said, you should really consider narrating. And well, let me look into this. And that's when I started with ACX and created my profile on there. And then, of course, we met, and the rest was history.
Well, thank you, good listener, for steering in my direction. That's awesome.
That's the website I wanted to promote, composerstudio.net. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for giving me.
I'll go ahead and put that when I do the when I go ahead and add everything. I'll go ahead and put that link below as well, so you guys can find that podcast and check it out. Definitely worth your time. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This has been great. Thank you, Shai, for tuning in and hanging out with us. It was fun having you. And yeah, definitely check out the audiobook. I will have all the links for that kind of stuff below, so you can find it. And I hope you guys really enjoy it.
Thanks, Jelaine. I appreciated this so much. It was awesome.
Yes, it was great having you. Bye.
Have a great day.